Hey everyone, this is Chapter 3 Vocabulary with maybe a little bit of descendants in the background. All right, number 1, anion. An anion is a negatively charged particle. It is something that has gained electrons to become negatively charged. Avogadro's number is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. It represents the value of a mole, kind of like 12 represents the value of a dozen. Binary compounds are compounds made of two things. This bi means two. So basically a cation and an anion. Or with covalent compounds just made of two different substances. A bonding pair is referring to a pair of electrons that are being shared by two atoms in a covalent compound. So bonding pairs to electrons that are shared. A cation is a positively charged ion, and it is made when an atom loses electrons. A covalent bond is a bond between two atoms where they are sharing electrons, and that's what's holding them together. A double bond is two covalent bonds. It's two bonding pairs for a total of 4 electrons. Electronegativity refers to the pull that atoms have on electrons in a shared bonding situation. Higher the electronegativity, the higher the pull on electrons. An ion is a charged particle. So atoms are neutral, molecules are neutral, but if they gain or lose electrons, then they become ions. An ionic bond is the attraction that occurs between ions of opposite charges that holds them together and forms a compound, so an ionic compound. And an ionic compound is a compound that's made up of ions. Charged particles attracted to each other. Isoelectronic means, literally the word means having the same electron structure. So ions, you'll learn, form because of the Octet Rule and because atoms are not exactly stable if they don't have a full valence shell. And so atoms will gain or lose electrons to try to have a full valence shell and have the same electron structure as the noble gases, which all have a full valence shell. So we can say that ions are isoelectronic with certain noble gases. They have the same electron structure or arrangement as a noble gas. A Lewis structure is a two-dimensional way of drawing covalent compounds and showing the bonds and the connections between the different atoms. A lone pair is referring to a pair of electrons that belongs just to a single atom, not being shared in a bond, but just belongs to that atom. Molar mass is the mass of 1 mole of a substance. And you get it from the periodic table. So like carbon was where it was defined. So 1 carbon-12 atom weighs 12 atomic mass units. But 1 mole of carbon atoms weighs 12 grams. It's just a way to convert from atomic mass units to grams. That's how many atoms are in a mole. Molecular formula, H2O, is an example of a molecular formula. It's for compounds. When we write out the sort of equation of the compound, what it's made up of, that's called the molecular formula. NaCl is the molecular formula. CH4, molecular formula. So we use the symbol of the elements, and then we use a little subscript to indicate how many atoms are in that element are in the compound. Molecule is a single unit of a compound. So an atom is a single unit of an element. A molecule is a single unit of a compound. Noble gases are group 8A elements on the periodic table. They all have a full valence shell. They're very inert. They don't like to react or bond with other things. They're pretty chill. Nonpolar covalent bond. So a covalent bond involves sharing of electrons, but in a nonpolar covalent bond, they're sharing very equally. So it's a very equal sharing. Versus a polar bond, which is down a little bit further, where you have one atom that sort of hogs electrons and pulls them away from the other atom, causing there to be poles, a slightly negative and a slightly positive pole on the molecule. So a nonpolar molecule is one that has all nonpolar bonds, and a polar molecule is one that has at least one polar bond. The Octet Rule, octet meaning 8. So this is the rule that basically says all atoms want to have a full valence shell, and most atoms will have a full valence shell if they have 8 electrons in their valence shell, the exception of hydrogen and helium. And so bonding and ion formation are all dictated basically by this desire for atoms to achieve that octet, or 8 valence electrons. A polyatomic ion is basically a compound that has lost electrons or gained electrons and become charged, rather than an atom that's lost them. So for example, OH minus hydroxide is a polyatomic ion, or NH4 plus is a polyatomic ion. A single bond and a single bond is a single shared pair in a covalent bond, so 2 electrons being shared. A triple bond is 3 pairs, so a total of 6 electrons being shared. There's no such thing as a quadruple bond. And valence electrons that I keep referencing are in the valence shell. So valence just means outermost. So in the outermost shell, so electrons live in these sort of energy levels or shells, and the last one, the outermost one, is called the valence shell, and the electrons in that shell are the valence electrons. And you'll learn ways to figure out the valence electrons very quickly, sort of cheating, by using your periodic table and not having to actually draw out all the rings. All right, that is Chapter 3 vocabulary in a nutshell.